The humid Lagos air clung to her skin as Elena walked across the University of Lagos campus, her backpack slung over one shoulder. The sun was already dipping behind the high-rise buildings of Yaba, casting long shadows over the red brick paths that twisted between the lecture halls, the Faculty of Arts, and the sprawling open spaces near the lagoon. Students lounged under the trees, some arguing over assignments, others lost in the blue glow of their phones. Yet Elena walked alone, her mind elsewhere, as always. She had always felt like an outsider. Brilliant, meticulous, but painfully lonely, she had learned early to rely on herself. The university's crowded halls and boisterous students intimidated her, a constant reminder of how little she fit in. Her solace lay in the library, a quiet corner of the Faculty of Arts building where she could lose herself in books and journals, the only companions she truly trusted. Elena's lecture that afternoon had been no different. Professor Olubeo, late 30s, tall and imposing in a sharply tailored shirt, had dominated the Senate Hall with a magnetic presence that left the students either riveted or intimidated. He was a man whose reputation preceded him, brilliant, articulate, and notoriously charming. Rumors circulated about his personal life, whispered in student hostels and over campus coffee. He had a string of admirers, yet no one truly knew him. As Elena raised her hand to ask a question, she felt the weight of every eye in the lecture hall on her. Her heart pounded, she hated attention. But something compelled her to speak. "Professor Bayo," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath, "could we explore the ethical implications of power dynamics in mentorship, particularly where the influence of authority intersects with personal ambition?" A ripple of murmurs ran through the students. Few dared question him in such a pointed manner. Professor Bayo paused, fixing her with a gaze that felt like it could pierce through her very thoughts. "Interesting," he said, his voice calm, smooth, with just a hint of amusement. "Your observation borders on bold, Miss?" "Okafor. Elena Okafor, sir." He nodded, leaning slightly against the desk. "Elena, you have a keen mind. I would like to discuss this further after class. My office, if you're willing." Elena's stomach flipped, a mix of fear and excitement coursing through her. She nodded, clutching her notebook like a shield, and left the hall in a daze. By evening, the campus had emptied slightly, the sunset painting the lagoon in golds and ambers. She approached the faculty building again, heart thumping. Professor Bayo's office was on the third floor, a room filled with shelves of books, academic journals, and the faint scent of aged leather and polished wood. He stood as she entered, a welcoming smile that disarmed her before she could even speak. "Miss Okafor," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I hope the corridors weren't too intimidating?" She shook her head. "No, sir." Her voice felt small in the large room, but her mind was alert, brimming with questions and ideas. "Good," he said, leaning back. "Tell me what you meant in the lecture. Let's unpack it together." For the next hour, they spoke of ethics, ambition, and responsibility in academia. Elena was careful, precise, articulating her thoughts with care. Professor Bayo listened intently, occasionally interjecting with probing questions that pushed her further. She had never felt so understood, so intellectually challenged, and simultaneously drawn to someone. There was an electricity in the air, subtle yet undeniable, that left her cheeks flushed. As the evening shadows deepened outside, Professor Bayo glanced at his watch. "I should let you go," he said, though his tone lacked finality. "But, Miss Okafor, I would like you to continue this discussion. Perhaps tomorrow?" Elena nodded, words failing her. Outside, the campus was quieter now, the lagoon reflecting the city lights in ripples. Walking back to her hostel, she tried to focus on the assignment she had postponed, but her thoughts kept drifting to the office, to the way Professor Bayo's gaze had lingered, and to the subtle intensity of his presence. The following week, their meetings became more frequent. Elena found herself lingering in the library longer, choosing study spots near the open windows so she could, accidentally, pass by him. Professor Bayo began suggesting articles, guiding her research, offering insights with a patience that made her feel seen for the first time in years. One late afternoon, The campus hummed with students rushing to lectures and hostel dinners. Elena was at her usual table in the faculty library, papers spread before her, when Professor Bayo appeared. "You're still here," he said softly, leaning against the table. "The sun's setting. You should get some rest." "I want to finish this, sir," she replied, trying to keep her tone professional, though the closeness of his presence made her pulse quicken. He crouched slightly to examine her notes, brushing a strand of hair from her notebook. "Very thorough. I can see you take pride in your work. Ambition suits you, Elena." Their hands brushed, accidentally, he claimed, though she felt the electricity spark instantly. She looked up at him, caught in the intensity of his eyes, and for a moment, the lines between mentor and something more blurred. Days turned into weeks. Study sessions moved from office to quiet campus cafes, sometimes walking along the lagoon paths under the warm Lagos sun. Their conversations evolved from academic to personal. Professor Bayo spoke of his youth in Lagos, of early struggles, of the loneliness that came with ambition. Elena shared her dreams, her fears, her frustrations with peers who misunderstood her. The boundaries, once clear, became hazy. Small gestures, a hand on her shoulder, a lingering look, subtle smiles, planted seeds of temptation. Elena, despite herself, began to anticipate their meetings, feeling a thrill in the thought of being in his presence. One evening, as the campus emptied and the orange city lights reflected on the lagoon, they found themselves walking back from the faculty library. A sudden downpour caught them unprepared. They ran for cover under a tree, laughing as water splashed around their feet. "You always manage to find your way into trouble," he said, his voice low. "Only when you're around, sir," she whispered, her voice betraying a nervous excitement. He didn't respond immediately, just looked at her, a long, steady gaze that made her heart hammer in her chest. The rain slowed, leaving the air heavy and charged. Their proximity felt dangerous, thrilling, and forbidden. For the first time, Elena realized that her admiration had morphed into something deeper and far more complicated. Back in her hostel room, Elena lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. The events of the day replayed over and over. His hand, the intensity in his eyes, the subtle smile that suggested he knew exactly the effect he had on her. She told herself it was wrong, that it was unthinkable to feel this way about a professor. And yet, she could not shake the pull, the magnetic tension that made her pulse quicken whenever she thought of him. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, "Be careful who you trust." Her stomach tightened. Was it a warning, a coincidence, or the beginning of something far more dangerous? She didn't know. But one thing was certain, life at Unilag had just become infinitely more complicated. And Professor Olu Bayo, brilliant, charming, and dangerously magnetic, was at the center of it all. The University of Lagos campus had a rhythm of its own, laughter spilling from the hostels, scooters rattling along Yaba streets, the scent of roasted suya mingling with warm lagoon air. Elena walked through the familiar paths, a notebook tucked under her arm, her thoughts consumed not by lectures or assignments, but by Professor Olu Bayo. Since their first accidental brush of hands in the library, the weight of his presence had lingered in her mind. She found herself anticipating their meetings, rehearsing questions in her head, feeling a thrill each time he smiled at her, as if aware of the effect he had. It began innocuously, longer study sessions in the faculty library, then a quiet cafe near the lagoon where they could speak freely without interruption. Professor Bayo had a habit of arriving early, always with a fresh cup of coffee, and Elena found herself craving the calm comfort of his voice as he walked her through complex theories. "You have a rare ability, Elena," he said one afternoon, leaning across the table. "You don't just understand the material, you question it. That's what separates the brilliant from the ordinary." Elena felt a warmth she had never felt before. Compliments were rare in her life, and coming from someone of his stature, they carried weight. She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, her pulse quickening. "And hard to impress," she said, trying to mask the flutter in her chest. He laughed softly, a low, magnetic sound that made her shoulders tighten. "Perhaps. But you've managed it. That's saying something." They continued their work, but the air between them had shifted. The conversation occasionally veered into personal territory, his upbringing in Lagos, the loneliness of academia, her dreams and disappointments. Elena found herself sharing things she had kept buried for years, how she felt like an outsider, how she longed to be recognized not just for her intellect but for who she was. Professor Bayo listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. At times, she could swear he saw straight into her soul. One evening, after a long session in the library, he suggested a walk by the lagoon. The campus was quieter now, the sun dipping low, painting the water in shades of gold and orange. Students had gone back to hostels, leaving them alone on the brick paths and under the swaying palm trees. "Sometimes I come here to think," he said, gazing out at the water. "It's a small escape from everything else." Elena nodded, hesitant but drawn to the calmness of the scene, and to him. They walked side by side, silence stretching comfortably between them. And then, as they reached a small secluded bench, he stopped and turned to her. "Elena," his voice was soft, almost vulnerable. "Do you ever wonder if people like us end up alone because we care too much about the wrong things?" She looked into his eyes, feeling the pull of honesty, warmth, and something else she couldn't name. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I think maybe we just don't fit where we're supposed to." He nodded, taking a step closer. She felt the heat of his presence, the subtle weight of his attention pressing against her senses. For the first time, the air between them felt different, charged, dangerous, yet intoxicating. It was a rainy afternoon. She had stayed late at the library, grading herself harshly on a paper she thought was mediocre. Professor Bayo found her still at her table. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said, setting a hand on her shoulder. The contact was brief, but her skin tingled where his fingers brushed her. "I have to," she whispered, trying to maintain composure. He crouched slightly to examine her notes. "Your work is impressive, Elena. You should give yourself credit." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, words failed her. The tension in the room thickened, the usual boundaries of mentor and student slipping, dissolving. Then, an accidental touch of hands as he passed her a pen, their fingers lingering a second too long. She looked up into his eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. It was thrilling, dangerous, and she knew, deep down, that she wanted it to happen again. After that day, Elena became acutely aware of every glance, every subtle movement. Her thoughts oscillated between guilt and desire. She questioned herself constantly, "Is this wrong? Is he manipulating me? Or does he feel the same?" Professor Bayo, for his part, maintained the facade of professionalism in class, yet his private interactions with her became increasingly personal. He would linger over her ideas, occasionally offering subtle praise or concern, each gesture stirring feelings she had no intention of acknowledging. One afternoon, during a discussion about Lagos's societal pressures on young women, he leaned closer to point out a note she had written. The proximity was intoxicating. His voice was low, deliberate, almost a whisper. "Elena, you're stronger than you realize. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Her chest tightened. She felt exposed, yet safe in his presence. It was confusing, overwhelming, and thrilling all at once. Their meetings soon moved beyond the campus library. They found quiet cafes tucked away in Yaba's side streets, small, dimly lit spaces where they could speak freely. Sometimes, they walked through the narrow alleys near the lagoon, hidden from the main campus thoroughfares. On one such evening, they shared a table cluttered with papers and coffee cups. The conversation was academic at first, then personal, then charged. "Elena," he said softly, "I hope you know how extraordinary you are. But sometimes brilliance comes with loneliness. I see it in you." She swallowed hard, the words echoing in her chest. "I sometimes wonder if people see me at all," she admitted. He reached across the table, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I see you," he said simply. Her heart raced. The words were innocent enough, but the touch, the look, everything about him drew her in. For the first time, she felt that dangerous combination of admiration, desire, and fear. One evening, as they walked back from a secluded cafe under the warm Lagos night, Elena's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Be careful who you trust. Not everything is as it seems. Her stomach tightened. She glanced at Professor Bayo, who was speaking animatedly about a paper, completely unaware of the warning that had arrived. She pocketed the phone, uncertain of what it meant. Was it just a coincidence, or a hint of the trouble their growing closeness might bring? Despite the warning, she couldn't deny it. She wanted him. The thought of their next meeting sent a shiver down her spine. She knew the line between mentor and something else had already been crossed. And she feared and hoped that she was powerless to stop it. The University of Lagos campus had shifted. The usual hum of students, laughter spilling from hostels, scooters rattling along Yaba streets, and the faint aroma of roasted suya, was now underlined by whispers and sideways glances. Rumors spread like wildfire in the corridors, in lecture halls, and through the student WhatsApp groups that buzzed incessantly with gossip. Elena walked the familiar paths, her head down, clutching her books like armor. Every laugh she heard felt like it might be about her. Every glance seemed pointed, accusing. The once comforting campus had become a minefield. She had known, of course, that spending so much time with Professor Olubayo outside of class was risky. But she hadn't expected the attention, the scrutiny, the judgment to arrive so quickly. It started subtly, a friend noticing the two of them leaving a cafe together, a classmate whispering after seeing them at the lagoon path, the occasional pointed look in the library. Then the photos appeared. One had been taken discreetly by a student from a distance. Elena and Professor Bayo in a secluded cafe, leaning close over papers, their hands almost touching. The caption had been shared across social media with relentless speed. Student and lecturer, is it just mentorship? Elena stared at her phone, frozen. Her heart pounded in her chest. Panic clawed at her chest. She knew what this could mean, both for her career and for him. She had come to rely on him not just as a mentor, but as someone who understood her in a way no one else did. And now that connection, that intimacy, was being twisted into scandal before it had even begun. Elena confronted Professor Bayo in his office after class, her hands trembling as she clutched her notebook. "Professor, they're talking about us," she said, voice shaking. "Photos, people are spreading rumors. I don't know what to do." He looked at her, eyes sharp and calculating, a mixture of concern and frustration crossing his face. "Elena, this is serious. You understand that, right? If this spreads to the administration." "I know," she whispered, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I don't want to get you in trouble. I don't want to lose you." His gaze softened for a brief moment, and he reached out, taking her hand in his. "I care about you, Elena. But we need to be careful. Very careful." The words offered some comfort, yet the fear lingered. She realized how much power he held over her, not just emotionally, but in every aspect of her life at Unilag. And she wasn't sure whether she wanted to fight it or surrender completely. The scandal escalated. Faculty members began whispering behind closed doors. A senior lecturer had spotted them walking near the lagoon late one night. Rumors reached the administration. Disciplinary hearings were mentioned in hushed tones. Elena met Professor Bayo in his office, frustration and fear bubbling over. "You promised this wouldn't happen," she accused, her voice shaking. "You said we'd be careful." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the office. "I did everything I could, Elena. But people notice. Lagos is small in its own way, and Unilag, people talk. You knew the risk." "I didn't think it would get this far," she cried, the betrayal of circumstance stinging more than anything else. "I thought I could trust you." His voice dropped, low and almost desperate. "You can trust me. I care about you. But we're both in dangerous territory now. You have to think about what this means for your future." She felt the weight of the truth in his words. This was no longer just desire or secret longing. It had become a matter of survival. Career, reputation, and love were colliding in a way she could never have imagined. The next morning, the university was buzzing. Photos from the cafe had spread further. Even students who didn't know Elena were whispering in lecture halls. Social media posts added insinuation to the story, and by noon, the administration had summoned her for questioning. She sat in the office of the dean, heart racing, palms slick with sweat. Words tumbled out as she tried to explain. We didn't. It was only mentorship. I never meant for anything else to happen. I care about Professor Bayo, but I never. The dean's expression was unreadable, a mixture of concern and stern authority. Miss Okafor, we take these matters very seriously. Your conduct, your relationship with a faculty member, these are not matters to be taken lightly. There will be an investigation. You understand the consequences? Yes, sir, she whispered. The weight of reality crushed her. Her career, her reputation, her dreams, all now balanced precariously on the decisions of others. Elena returned to Professor Bayo's office that evening. The energy between them had shifted. Where once there had been playful intimacy, there was now tension and fear. This is bad, he said bluntly. Very bad. And I can't protect you from all of it. You have to decide what you're willing to risk. She felt tears prick at her eyes. I don't want to lose my future. But I can't stop caring about you. His expression softened, but a shadow of guilt passed over his face. I care about you too, Elena. But sometimes love isn't enough. Not in a place like this, not in Lagos, not at Unilag. We can't pretend otherwise. That night, Elena wandered the quiet paths along the lagoon, reflecting on everything. The city lights shimmered across the water, but they offered no clarity. Her mind raced with possibilities, ending the connection to save herself, risking it all to stay with him, navigating the murky ethical waters that now defined their relationship. She realized she had a choice, but none of the options were easy. Each path carried consequences, loss, heartbreak, or a permanent stain on her reputation. And yet, for all the fear and uncertainty, a small, stubborn part of her heart refused to let go of Professor Bayo. For the first time, she understood that their relationship was no longer just about mentorship or even desire. It was a test of loyalty, courage, and survival, and the outcome would change both their lives forever. The air over University of Lagos felt heavier now. The sun cast long, warm shadows across the red brick paths, and the lagoon shimmered like liquid gold in the late afternoon. Elena walked alone, clutching her backpack close to her chest, lost in thought. Every step echoed with the weight of the decisions she had been avoiding, the consequences she could no longer run from. The scandal had reached a fever pitch. Photos had circulated across social media, whispers followed her through lecture halls, and the dean had already scheduled a disciplinary hearing. Professor Bayo had tried to reassure her, but even he could not protect her completely from the judgment of the university or the city that thrived on gossip. Elena found him waiting in his office, the familiar scent of leather and polished wood mingling with the faint aroma of coffee. His posture was tense, his usual calm confidence replaced by a weighty seriousness. Elena, he said softly, we need to decide. This situation, it's out of control. We can't keep pretending it's just mentorship. You need to choose, and I need to know if we can survive this together. Her hands trembled as she clutched her notebook. I don't know if I can risk everything for us, she whispered. My future, my career, everything I've worked for, it's on the line. But if I walk away, I don't know if I can forgive myself for leaving you. He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers, full of intensity and something deeper, desperation, perhaps, or longing. I love you, Elena. But love isn't enough to shield us from what's coming. You have to decide if you're willing to risk it all, and I need to be honest. I can't lose you to the consequences either. Her chest tightened. In that moment, she realized the truth. There was no safe path. Whatever she chose would leave a scar. She left the office, her thoughts tangled like the streets of Lagos. She wandered past Yaba's bustling markets, the bright neon signs reflecting in puddles from a recent drizzle. Horns honked, voices rose and fell, and the city moved around her in a chaotic rhythm she couldn't quite match. She thought back to the first time she had met him in the Senate Hall, to their walks by the lagoon, their private cafes, the laughter, and the stolen touches. She remembered the thrill, the guilt, the warmth of feeling understood. And she remembered the fear of losing herself, of ruining her future, of being exposed. Her mind turned over every possibility, every consequence, until she felt like she could no longer breathe. The next morning, Elena stood before the dean, her palms sweaty, her mind racing. Professor Bayo was present as well, but the tension in the room was palpable. The dean's eyes were stern, his voice formal and detached. "Miss Okafor, Professor Bayo," he began, "we have reviewed the evidence. This university takes these matters very seriously. However, we also recognize the potential for genuine mentorship and academic excellence. The decision rests with you, Miss Okafor. How do you wish to proceed?" Elena swallowed hard, her eyes flicking to Professor Bayo. She could see the tension in his jaw, the silent pleading in his gaze. And yet she knew what she had to do. "I choose my future," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "I cannot continue this relationship. Not now, not like this. I care about him deeply, but I cannot risk everything I've worked for." Professor Bayo's face fell, but he nodded slowly, understanding. "I respect your decision," he said quietly. "And I care about you, Elena. Always." Walking back across campus, Elena felt a mixture of relief, sorrow, and resolve. The decision was excruciating, but she felt the first spark of empowerment she had known in weeks. She had chosen herself, her career, her dreams, without completely shutting out the memory of love. She passed the lagoon, where the sun shimmered off the water, and allowed herself a moment to reflect. The city pulsed with life around her, students laughing, scooters rattling, vendors calling out, but she felt a quiet strength growing within her. She had survived temptation, scandal, and moral chaos, and had emerged wiser, more self-aware, and resilient. Professor Bayo would face consequences too. The university would reprimand him, perhaps more severely than her, and the gossip would linger. Yet the bond between them, unspoken, complex, and dangerous, remained a memory she would carry with her, a reminder of the lessons learned in both love and ambition. Weeks later, Elena walked across the graduation stage at Unilag, her heart steady. The applause of friends, family, and fellow students washed over her, but her thoughts lingered on the journey she had taken, the temptation, the scandal, and the choice. She had loved, lost, and learned. And as she looked toward the horizon, toward a future bright with possibility, she knew that some passions were not meant to be tamed, only remembered, and that sometimes the greatest love was the one that taught you how to love yourself.